Profit just means money. That's what he thinks.
Act in such a manner. As the saying goes, capitalists know only one color, which is green. In modern capitalist societies, we see this phenomenon in action with regard to the effect of market incentives on immigration policy. Immigration brings both cheap labor and a mass of potential consumers, which can be marketed toward, so capitalists lobby in favor of mass migration to grow the economy. Most of the GOP had before Trump supported immigration, such as the infamous Gang of Eight, which included Ted Cruz. Even after Trump, the GOP continues to support immigration as long as it is legal and selective. However, in actual reality, they have either overlooked immigrants who are part of the labor force, such as illegal immigrants who work in agriculture, or have signed bills designed to grant them amnesty.
Who cares? What does this achieve? Or the thesis? What thesis are you building towards here? You need to keep that in mind with every sentence. Stop wasting our time. Stop wasting our time.
Such as when Trump signed the DREAM Act. Back in the day, Reagan signed a mass amnesty bill granting millions of illegals the right to reside in the U.S., and Republicans were instrumental in the 1964 Immigration Act, which allowed unprecedented levels of immigration to the United States. Capitalist ideologues such as Elon Musk are also very vocal in terms of support for immigration. As he said once on Twitter, if you need a school, then you've already lost, referring to the question of elite human capital that comes from other countries in the context of global economic competition in high-skill sectors. In other words, if we have to produce our own,
I'm just skipping ahead towards the next. Who cares about any of this?
businesses certainly can, and the results will be disastrous. Capitalism is even more fragile than libertarians let on, since it cannot ultimately survive negative growth rates like centrally planned or traditional economies.
Okay, let's hear him out. Capitalism cannot survive negative growth rates, whereas centrally planned economies can. That's the thesis he's going to be proving here. Hear him out.
Economies can. As such, profit and exchange value is so central to the function of capitalism that without it, they simply...
Okay, I guess he's not going to justify that thesis. He's just going to assume it and move on. Okay.
cannot, except on very small scales, survive. This is why libertarians, when they exposit hypothetical scenarios to demonstrate the correctness of Austrian economics, always either use microeconomic examples or assume that the economy in question is a very small and local proprietor economy. So
there's this book, originally 2 books. Now you can buy it as 1 book, called Man, Economy and State with Power and Market. Now, this guy, he says he's read the literature, so I assume he's at least perused Man, Economy and State. The book assumes that for certain principles and builds up to the more complex principles very clearly. All of it still holds at the more complex examples. All that Austrian economics needs to assume is the basic fundamentals of praxeology. Man acts, which they would argue is not even an assumption. Well, let's just take it as an assumption for now, that man does engage in purposeful behavior. From that, you can understand how they get to the other prerequisites of praxeology. And from that, you can get the rest of Austrian economics. Really, you've got to attack the root here. You want to attack Austrian econ.
Which is what existed in the undeveloped West. Once you scale up the economy and introduce finance, suddenly these examples fail. The reality is that the way capitalism functions right now is not crony capitalism, but rather it is the full development of the potentialities of capitalism itself. So no, there's no such thing as national capitalism. Capitalism is, was, and always will be an international phenomenon based on the exchanges of merchants and producers from all around the world. Capitalism is a global phenomenon, and it creates incentives for governments and market actors to adopt cosmopolitan, mercantile attitudes rather than national.
I also hate this fucking notion that capitalism creates incentives. Capitalism is the base state. It is the socialists who come in with their goddamn triangular interventions. Triangular interventions. You'll learn about that if you read Man, Economy and State with Power and Market. These triangular interventions, they are warping the natural state of the market. Without that warping in there, then you have capitalism. Did this guy ever define capitalism? I don't think so. He didn't even define the NEP. In this video where he tried to debunk the NEP, he didn't define the NEP. He said, well, the NEP it basically means don't step on the snake. That's about the level we're dealing with here, Hafippo.
Nationalist or producerist ones. Capitalism and nationalism are as incompatible as oil and water. Now let's talk about crony capitalism. Capitalism has seen its fair share of crises throughout the decades, such as the Great Depression.
He's done his reading. Told us he's done his reading. He's assured us he's done his reading. Presumably, this is where he'll bring up, well, they've actually got a really good argument around this called Austrian business cycle theory, which explains how all of this, all of these things, these cyclical recessions, followed by boom-bust cycle, presumably he's going to say, well, how that's actually they can explain this through the mechanism of central banking and more broadly fractional reserve banking. They introduce fiduciary media, fiat money, and that causes that because it causes the interest rates to be artificially lowered. Presumably he's done his research, guys. So let's give him the benefit of the doubt here. Panobit TQ for $2 Canadian. Thank you very much. His argument is lacking a bit of random quotes. Yeah, I'm surprised. He's operating with some restraint now.
2008 financial crisis, the 1990s Japanese real estate bubble, as well as the dot-com bubble and Eurozone debt crisis. Many socialists see this as the result of unregulated markets, which, because there are few or no controls over what people are allowed to do in markets, regularly experience boom and bust cycles as well as crises. I'm not interested in determining whether socialist economies are less prone to catastrophe than capitalism. Rather, I simply want to address a kind of cope that libertarians pull out anytime someone criticizes free markets for being crisis prone. By far the most common libertarian response to these crises is to respond that they were not products of the free market, but rather of government intervention in the market.
Specifically, the introduction of fiduciary media?
They call heavily regulated markets crony capitalism.
No. You dropped the ball right as you're about to get the touchdown, man. This is he's an American. He'll understand this if I put it in sports terms. No, it's not the regulations that cause the business cycle. It's the introduction of fiduciary media, as it necessitates clustered malinvestments. When those malinvestments become clear that they were wrong, suddenly there has to be a reallocation of capital. That's the recession. It's not that you have to get a license to sell your hot dogs in New York. That doesn't cause the business cycle. Yeah, money. This isn't even like a deep argument that we make. Like, you have to really fucking dig through the fucking tomes to get to this argument. How often do the most prominent figures in libertarianism talk about central banking and the evils of it? Ron Paul talks about this like every goddamn fucking speech he makes. This is not some super obscure position that we're holding here. We're very open with the mechanisms we think cause this. He's conflating so many different things. He's conflating our opposition to regulations, which we are opposed to. But he's conflating that with our explanation for how the business cycle occurs. They're not the same thing. Negative $38.89 for $5. This is like watching a new chess player trying to play the Najdorf Sicilian. Bro, you're not Magnus Carlsen. Indeed, I don't know what the Najdorf Sicilian is, but yeah, the analogy works. I think that pretty much sums up the whole video. He's just bumbling his way through it, trying to use Google Scholar as something that'll make this a coherent video. It's just not working out. Austrian business cycle theory is the simplest business cycle theory to understand. Yeah, probably, honestly. Like, the other ones are a bit more, you gotta have like a fucking bachelor's in mathematics or something to get it. Or wherever the fuck Keynes was smoking. Sawyer07 for 50 DKK. Remember to like the live, guys. Give a little foot to the algorithm. There you go. Give it. Smash that like button.
Or as Stefan Molyneux liked to say, crony capitalism. The logic behind this response is that politicians who regulate markets don't know what they're doing because markets are so complex, so they invariably create unintended externalities with their regulations that end up causing a crisis. A truly unregulated free...
Also, I mean, again, he's conflating two different things. Yes, these regulations. You have to take into account what Bastiat says. What does he say? There's the seen and there's the unseen. There are unseen problems with these interventions. That is true, but that's not specifically our business cycle theory. Like, I don't think this guy is particularly well versed in economics if he thinks they're the same thing. They're just not the same thing. They're not the same. And this guy is trying to present himself as an expert who is able to, give us a good steel man here and then tear down that steel man. He's just not. Going to use the rage cam clips for out of context Zulu. Yeah, they're going to be good for that. That's why the stream deck it's gonna pay dividends.
The market, on the other hand, would not experience crises simply because people are acting rationally according to an incentive structure, which, because it naturally occurs as a consequence.
Okay, so the argument he's going to go for is, well, what if they don't act rationally? That doesn't explain the business cycle, because that wouldn't be clustered. What causes clustered malinvestment? Malinvestment can still happen in a free market. It can happen. But why is it clustered? Well, you need a full market-wide mechanism to cause that. Good candidate for that is going to be money, the interest rates on loans, Shit like that. That's exactly where we think the locus of the problem lies.
Of scarcity of
Next remnant should be this weekend.
resources and rational human action, always guides by the invisible hand market actors. Companies that don't abide by these incentives will fail, and the possibility of failure ensures that people who act rationally will take their place. It's a very convenient argument.
In fact, like that's just how do you think evolution works? Like, yeah, if you're an irrational investor who's constantly malinvesting, then yeah, you're not going to have the capital to invest for very long. So you're no longer going to be within that set of people who are investing. You're not going to be an entrepreneur any longer. Like that's just like essentially the same as the natural selection argument.
They will point out that government bailouts of banks during 2008 simply prolonged the crisis and kicked it further down the road, and that the banks should have been allowed to fail so the free market could work its magic. There are some rather inconvenient problems with this, however. Banks are basically the cornerstone of any capitalist economy.
So I wonder what happens if the government futzes with them.
Because it's where people hold their savings and where companies get their credit. To allow a bank to fail would simply cause an even worse crisis.
Furthermore, how could a bank fail under full reserve? How could it literally fail? It can't. It's not. These are two separate institutions on our theory. They're supposed to be two separate institutions. One institution does loaning out of money. Another institution does storage of money. These two things are being conflated by the state. By the state. To be fair, I'm relatively new to the Austrian business cycle theory, but isn't the point that expansion of fiduciary credit further incentivizes malinvestment? Not created per se at Luxu. So it's not necessarily that it's like incentivizing malinvestment. I don't think that's necessarily the right way to put it. It's that you no longer have clear signals if you're an investor on how much capital has been saved because the interest rates have been artificially lowered. And you might be a smart Austrian who knows about this stuff, but still you don't have access to the real interest rates. So it's that if you are basing your investments on the interest rate on the market, as you normally should, then you're going to invest in longer run projects that are actually sensible. That's the problem. I think it's Newman has a really good lecture on this where he describes it in terms of like, imagine Crusoe ate some magic mushrooms and it made him hallucinate that he has way more resources than he actually does. That's effectively what's being done by introducing fiduciary media.
The level of the Great Depression, causing bank runs, credit instability, the loss of savings, a slowdown in investment, and a whole host of other problematic things. By bailing out banks, politicians were acting rationally, since there's obviously an incentive in capitalist governments to keep the market running for as
Capitalist governments.
long as possible, and to ensure that if a crisis occurs, that it remains shallow and does not get worse. Even if the can was merely kicked down the road, if we even assume that, or the real crisis was just papered over, it's nonetheless rational to keep things going for as long as possible.
No, but the point is, the more you kick it down the road, the worse it gets, because you're just taking those magic mushrooms again and keeping the malinvestment going. That's the problem.
Since any serious interruption in the function of the market could mean the total collapse of the market worldwide, not just the failure of a few companies in a single country, which could be corrected in due course by the invisible hand.
Yeah, somebody summed it up in chat quite well, that he thinks there's like a literal invisible hand guiding things. That's how we think. He thinks we literally believe in that.
If the whole market collapses everywhere, there won't be an invisible hand. People will just be starving.
Yep, he thinks the invisible hand can die. Need I say anything more?
Until an alternative economic arrangement can
He calls himself a nationalist monarchist, but he's just a Marxist.
come into being. The second problem is that the 2008 financial crisis was not caused by excessive intervention or regulation in the market, but rather under-regulation of the market.
Let's see what he has to say.
In the 1980s, Reagan's government engaged in a spree of cutting all sorts of various financial regulations in an effort to make housing more affordable. They repealed parts of the 1930 Glass-Steagall Act, which put prohibitions on financial
Okay, and from what specific mechanism in there do we get clustered malinvestment?
speculation. Before the crisis, banks were both speculating on property and giving out risky subprime mortgages to
Oh, hello there. Banks giving out subprime mortgages. Risky. They're doing a bunch of investment. Why are banks doing investment? Oh, so that's the mechanism. Wait a minute. Isn't that what Austrian business cycle theory says? Why are banks giving out these investments? Because of government intervention, buddy. There you go. You caught up, buddy.
minorities in order to make extra money with the hopes that they would not default on their mortgages or profit by foreclosing on properties when they defaulted. This should have been illegal, since it's rather irrational and fiscally dangerous behavior. But as it turns out, market actors do not always act rationally. Sometimes they do risky things to make short-term.
Yeah, did Didn't I say that? He's going to be like, well, what if they're not rational? Not the question. The question is, why are they being clustered irrational? Why are there these clustered malinvestments? You can't explain this mechanism, bro, by just saying, well, sometimes people are irrational. That wouldn't explain why it's clustered. Why is everybody being irrational at the same time? Why? You need some way to explain this. This is an observable fact that there is this clustered malinvestment. That's what you have to explain in your business cycle theory. And yours not. Panotique for $5 Canadian. Thank you very much. We should make Dave Smith and this guy debate. They might agree on everything, though. Perhaps.
From cash, kind of like gambling. And if market actors are actually super rational, gambling wouldn't be a profitable business. Naturally, these subprime loans defaulted and a lot of the speculation failed, which caused housing prices to crash. Banks were left holding the bag, which created a rather precarious economic environment, considering that the whole economy rests on banks. This prompted the bailouts, as we know. Now, if the whole crisis was the result of under-regulation, then why exactly is the totally unregulated free market the solution to
It wasn't. That's the point of contention.
Capitalist crisis? The Japanese real estate bubble is not as clean an example of failures caused by the free market, since certain policies that encourage businesses to have office space in Tokyo and the insanely complicated jungle of tax policy in Japan contributed toward the crisis. But nonetheless, much of the crisis was caused by deregulation of the Japanese currency exchanges and changes in bank behavior. For a number of reasons,
changes in bank behavior. That's a real sweet tone to put on. Banks are loaning out other people's money. Real sweet tone to put on that.
Real estate was rapidly rising in value in Japan, and banks wanted to cash in by investing in the real estate market. Due to currency deregulation, the yen was also rising in value. Due to these factors combined, Japanese banks, which ordinarily are deposit savers, started engaging more aggressively in the capital market by investing in stocks and handing out property loans. Once housing prices naturally started to come back down, banks suddenly faced a crisis because their investments rapidly decreased in value and they were no longer able to profit so much from property loans. Something as simple as a sudden rise in property prices, which could totally occur in an unregulated market based on changes in the way people subjectively value property.
So his answer for the mechanism for clustered malinvestment in the free market is in effect like the Boltzmann brain argument. Well, it's technically possible that a whole bunch of people could randomly malinvest at one time. Sure. Why would this be a regular occurrence, though? Why would this be at all expected? Why wouldn't anybody be hedging? This is utterly nonsense.
I.e. proximity to cities, perceived value of the local environment, changes in population or birth rates, etc., can cause a bubble which banks unwisely invest in. And once that bubble pops, the banks can suffer the consequences, potentially failing and bringing down the market with them. Without a government to oversee investment and lending behavior, these kinds of crises would occur over and over again until it becomes so bad that the whole capitalist system collapses globally. But of course, crony capitalism also refers to something else, which is when companies profit by a close relationship to government, i.e., policies that benefit specific companies, subsidies, and so on. Libertarians insist that intervention of this kind leads to market failures as well, but that isn't really obviously evident. A good example of what I'm talking about is the current state of agriculture in the United States. The real market value of agricultural products is actually very low, so low that farmers would not make much profit if
they could make profit if they weren't all growing fucking corn. Because it turns out there's not that much corn being needed, but the state just subsidizes it all. They could do other things. And then there wouldn't be fucking corn syrup in goddamn everything.
If they sold their crops at market price, perhaps with the exception of cash crops like tobacco. If the government stopped subsidizing crop prices, then there would be little, if
there would be rational allocation of crops. That's what would happen.
Any incentive for people to actually become farmers or to produce food.
Farming can only happen with government subsidy. That is the argument that I just heard. The agricultural revolution, it must have happened by government subsidy. It must have taken off by government subsidy. We are prosperous to the degree that there is government subsidy. This is the caliber of our opponents.
Food. Farming is not a very prestigious job in an industrialized service.
This guy completely ripped off Mendes. Yeah, no, we were talking earlier. How he just, I don't know if this is just for this video because he's like trying to make fun of Mendes Wave or something. But like, yeah, no, he just ripped the Mendes Wave thing and slapped his own logo over it, which looks to be like a AI generated Bud Light heavy metal can.
Economy. It requires specialized education and has never paid very well. It's also rather precarious since harvest can fail or there might only be a partial harvest. Historically, in agrarian economies, during droughts or bouts of blight, people could literally starve. That's how mercurial conditions are in agriculture. Things have improved greatly with the advent of modern herbicides and disease-resistant GMOs, but there's always...
You know how you get those things? Capitalism. You don't get them through socialism. The government doesn't wish fertilizer into being. In fact, the Africans, they don't really use a whole lot of fertilizer. Even though the Westerns people keep trying to wish it to be, but they don't have the capitalist mentality over there, so they don't use fertilizer. They don't save. They don't do these things.
the possibility that you don't get a great harvest. Why would anyone want to take this risky job under capitalist conditions?
Why would anybody want to take a risk under capitalism? And this coming right after the section where he told us that capitalist markets, they face these crises because people are too prone to taking risks. But under capitalism, why the hell would anybody take the risk that they might have a bad harvest? These are the caliber of our opponents here.
If there were no monetary incentive to do so.
There is a monetary incentive to do so. That doesn't come from the fucking government. It comes from the fact that people want to buy food, you retard.
How do we get people to produce food? Something which is the central underpinning of any economy.
We solved the problem of how to get people to produce food. You know what the solution is called? Capitalism. You know what the anti-solution is called? Communism.
Agricultural subsidies, as it turns out, are a really good idea because the invisible hand would have made the profession appear obsolete. Farming would be a job left to poorer, less advanced countries.
Yeah, is this just rage bait? Is this like somebody just made this to troll capitalists? Because this is just really, really pathetic level of argumentation. Like, does this person actually exist? Is this a person who actually believes these things? I mean, I was reading the comments of this video earlier, and there were people apparently agreeing with this thing. This is absurd.
And all food would be imported. In a truly global world, it makes some rational sense to carry out this kind of neo-colonialism. But the problem is that food insecurity is quite dangerous under circumstances in which politics, in Schmidt's sense, has not ended.
You know what a really big problem in more capitalist countries is right now? It's called obesity, where people in capitalist countries, we actually have such an incredible abundance of food that it's a national health problem that people eat too much food and it's unhealthy for them. That would be unthinkable for any communist society, unthinkable for any feudalist society, unthinkable for any Bronze Age society, unthinkable for all of these societies, that there be such an abundance of food that people could that it would be a big problem that people get sick from eating too much of it. Even the poorest in our societies can get sick from eating too much food. That's how abundant it is. There is not a problem with starvation in capitalist countries. This is nonsense. Yeah, it's like, I saw this tweet, actually. I believe I bookmarked it. This is in my Choosing Poverty folder. Yeah. Let me pull up this tweet to show you what food insecurity looks like.
It's really bad.
Danielle Grant is starving.
I know. I'm trying to see if I can get some food because we literally don't have anything to eat today and tomorrow. So I'm gonna try.
For some reason, I doubt that that is the case. This woman has no access to food. I don't know what it is about her, but I have my doubts that that is in fact the case. This is food insecurity. These are the food insecure people who are going to die because SNAP has been removed. She's super insecure about her food. You just can't get anything to eat. You know, I've been very poor myself, and somehow I managed. I bought the cheapest fucking food ever. I was making lentil soup probably every single week. I just bulk bought a bunch of lentils. I don't think this woman is bulk buying lentils. I think she's probably door dashing or buying plates or, pineapple soaked in Kool-Aid. I think that's how you get to look like this. I don't think it's by eating a bunch of lentil soup or rice and beans. I ate lentil soup. I ate a lot of lentil soup. So I just don't fucking pay attention to any of these sorts. Any of these sorts are claiming about like some big problem of food insecurity under capitalism. Like, absolutely fucking not. Hey, I reached 100,000 likes. Would you look at that? Just looked at my old noties there. 100,000. Zulu on top.
It is for very good reason that governments use subsidies to encourage people to engage in agricultural work. Subsidies...
they're okay, but lentils are mid. I kind of like lentils. I do like them. But also it's an incredibly cheap way to get calories into you without being, unhealthy. Incredibly cheap way of doing that. So that's the main reason why I did it.
And other fields serve the same role. We need missiles, so the government subsidizes R&D companies. We need satellites, so the government subsidizes SpaceX. Consider this government investing funds into companies and receiving in return power and security. It's a great deal, and in fact, many economies have supported themselves by more or less nationalizing military production. This was true in Nazi Germany as well as the Soviet Union.